I never meant to go back to the ridge. I had a life away from it, a job that let me sleep in a bed and order groceries. But Dad's old truck sat there in the driveway like a question no one wanted to answer. My sister said to sell it. I said I'd think about it. Then the sheriff called, used my full name like he used to when I was a teenager in trouble for cutting class to fish. He wasn't asking me to sell anything. He wanted to know if I still remembered the switchbacks on South Watch and whether I could spare a few days. People go missing all the time, I said. It came out colder than I meant. I was already putting a duffel together. They went missing on the path you grew up on, he said. 2 of them. A couple. And then yesterday a kid from town. I looked at the duffel and saw how small it was. I added a roll of bright tape, a headlamp, the boots I swore I'd never wear again. I told my sister I'd be back. She did that tight smile she does now, the one that means she won't ask the questions that will make me leave for good. She's good like that. I hugged her anyway. The ridge looked smaller when I turned off the highway, like it had been folded up and set closer to the town to make it easier for tourists to take pictures. I know that's not how mountains work. But the strip mall with the new coffee place and the rental e-bikes didn't used to be there. The river was lower than I remembered, thanks to a dry spring. The forest line in the distance looked like a shadow someone had smudged with a thumb. The sheriff's office smelled like coffee and wet nylon. They'd turned the meeting room into a staging area. Laminated maps lay under rocks and radios. Orange vests hung from chair backs like shed skins. He was there. Same square shoulders. Same frown. More gray. He hugged me halfway, like a cousin at a funeral. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm here." He nodded. "We got the call from a sister in Milwaukee on Monday. Couple from out of state. Parked at the trailhead on Sunday morning. Never checked in at the lodge. Car still there. Then yesterday afternoon we got a call from Mrs. Tobin. You remember her? Her boy Ethan didn't come home from track practice. His last ping was out by the service road near the old fire tower." "Who runs out there after practice?" I asked. "Kids do stupid things," he said. "They also know shortcuts they shouldn't." He slid me a folder. Inside were printouts of the couple's reservation confirmation, 2 DMV photos, the boys' school picture. I focused on the basics: dates, last known positions, the way faces look when they think they're just having their picture taken and not posing for a missing poster later. "We've been out 2 days," he said. "Weather's been good. No sign. Dogs got bouncy near the ravine, but then nothing." "Wind eats scent in there," I said, before I could stop myself. He knew that. I knew that. We both heard what I wasn't saying. "You still know the switchbacks?" "I can walk them in the dark." He didn't ask if I already had. It felt like summer trying on spring's jacket when we stepped out of the office. Warm sun, cool breeze, dust lifting off the lot. Volunteers in their neon shirts stretched and joked too loud, the way people do when they want to convince themselves this is a game with a prize at the end. I kept my bag light. GPS, topo map, compass, 2 liters of water, protein bars I didn't plan to eat but would be glad to have, a roll of flagging tape, first aid, knife, binoculars, a small bag of those little glow sticks you crack and shake. People always think glow sticks are for parties. They mark your way when the batteries die. At the Southwatch trailhead, someone had set up a sandwich board with sign-in sheets and Sharpies. The couple's rental car sat near the end of the row, a white hatchback that already had a film of dust on the windshield. There were 2 receipts on the dash, both for the coffee place in town. Sometimes there are clues so obvious you walk past them 3 times before you see them. I saw those and only thought about caffeine. We broke into teams. I got a ranger named Liv, who'd been on the job 2 years and had sharp eyes but slow feet. She apologized for her pace before we started. I told her we were not racing anyone but the sun. At the first switchback, I could taste the ridge. It sounds stupid to say, but there's a flavor to places you know down to your bones. This one was shale and pine sap, and the faint pepper smell of bear scat drying in leaves. Liv breathed through her mouth and watched the edges. She was good. She didn't fill the silence. We marked where kids had cut a new shortcut. We found a candy wrapper that looked fresh. We found boot prints that looked like dozens of other boot prints. We found where someone had tried to make a fire under a leaning boulder and failed. 2 miles in, we hit the fork, where the old fire road peeled off to the left, and the ridge path kept climbing to the right. The ravine lay a half-mile beyond the fork, a long gash in the earth where water worked slowly at stone, where wind sounded like voices if you let it. We took the fire road. It had weeded over, just enough to whisper at your ankles. A deer jumped the ditch and made Liv jump. I kept expecting to see Ethan's track shoes, like a breadcrumb he'd leave on purpose if he wanted to be found. We saw nothing. "Why'd you leave?" she asked, not looking at me. "I didn't want to keep finding people after," I said. After the thunderstorm a few summers back, the one that hit in July and tore out the bridge at Wolf Bend. We found 2 fishermen downstream the next day. They were under a log like someone had laid them there to nap. I kept seeing the one's wristband, the one they give you at the hospital when your wife has a baby. He'd scratched the ink ragged. She swallowed. "Sorry." I shrugged. These stories belong to the mountain. It tells them through us, and then forgets us. That's a weird way to look at it. "It keeps me from thinking I'm important," I said. We reached the clearing near the old fire tower, or where it had been. They took it down when I was in high school because it leaned like a drunk and people were daring each other to climb it. The clearing was still there. Bare dirt, old anchor bolts in the ground like teeth. A ring of rock where teens lit fires and drank warm beer. A few circular scars where someone had tried to spin their truck when the ground was wet. Liv crouched near the anchor bolts and traced the old paint scabs. "We had a guy break his ankle here last fall," she said. "Said he jumped off the stump and landed wrong. He was alone. He said he didn't hear his leg break. He only felt the earth lurch." I didn't ask why she told me that. In the brush past the clearing, something flashed. I moved toward it. It was a phone, face down, an older model with 2 cracks across the back. I picked it up with 2 fingers and held it out. Liv took photos, then bagged it. "Power's dead," she said. "Could be Ethan's. Could be some kid from last weekend." "Run the case," I said, even though she didn't need me to say it. The case had a sticker that said Tobin in block letters. People always label the parts of themselves that will go missing. We followed the trace of scuffs and bent grass down to the edge of the ravine. The drop there isn't a cliff. It's a slide. People have lost their footing on it and gone down fast, grabbing nothing, landing wrong on the ledge below, and finishing the fall with their bones already broken. We peered down. Nothing but pine duff and silence. Liv looked at me. You think he went over? If he did, he's down there out of view. It's a tight angle. We'd have to go around to see. Let's mark it and go around, she said, efficient, voice steady. Good ranger. Good training. She didn't ask to go down the slide. I liked her for that. We flagged a cedar with tape, logged coordinates, and headed back to the fire road to take the long way around to the lower ridge. The sun leaned toward the west. The breeze picked up. Somewhere, someone whistled a tune I half recognized and couldn't place. For a moment it sounded like it came from down in the ravine. Then it was gone. We took the lower trail until the map told us we were directly under where we'd been. We scanned the slope above. I saw nothing. Liv saw something. There, she said, pointing with 2 fingers the way rangers are taught. Those rocks. That line. It took me a second. Then I saw it. A slide pattern, faint, where debris had moved in a narrow path. We climbed up slowly, careful not to step where we might destroy what little the slope would show us. At the end of the line, near a stump, was a smear. Dark. Old. Not old enough to turn brown. I crouched and smelled it because I have learned to trust the nose as much as the eyes. It was blood, and not the kind you get from a scraped knee. It was big animal blood, heavy with iron. There were dark hairs stuck in it. Liv took photos, gloves snapping on and off. She didn't look away when she didn't want to look. I was willing to like her for that too. Big cat? She asked. Quiet. Not scared yet. Just cataloging options. Could be, I said. Mountain lion can take a deer easy. Could take a kid, if he was alone and dumb. If he ran. She nodded and then looked like she wished she hadn't nodded. People like to believe predators are only in places with signs and fences. The ridge doesn't know about signs. We fanned out, slow and low. I found a torn piece of running shirt caught on a bramble. Blue polyester. The school team is blue and white. Liv took it, bagged it, logged it. Her hands were steady. She took a breath every time she finished a step, like she was counting herself alive. We found more little things. A cap from a water bottle, a shoelace end, a broken stick that might have been broken by anything. We did not find a body. We did not find a living kid. We circled until the light went wrong, and then we stood there, not wanting to say what came next, because the only next was leaving. Back at the staging area, the sheriff listened with his eyes on the map. A state guy stood next to him. Thin tie, colder expression, the kind of polite you put on when telling strangers you don't plan to like them. He said he worked incidents in natural environments, like the woods were a suspect he'd interviewed before. Couple never made it past the ridge line, far as we can tell, he said, tapping at a circle someone had drawn. Car has mud from the trailhead, none from the upper lot. Their last cell ping is off the tower near town. Boy's phone died near the fire tower. You got blood and fabric near the south slide. He looked at me then like I'd put the blood there myself. You seen cat sign? Scat, claw marks on cedar 2 miles down. Plenty of deer in there. Squirrels bold enough to throw cones at you. Plenty to eat, I said. So we've got an active predatory animal, he said. We need to post closures. "We don't close South Watch for cats," the sheriff said. "We put up a sign and hand out whistles." "We do when we've got a missing kid and a missing couple," the state guy said. "You want me to call the press, or you want to do it?" The sheriff rubbed his forehead. He looked at me, but there was nothing in that look asking me to rescue him. He made the call. He always did. "I'll do it," he said. "We'll close the south approach, keep the north open, increase patrols near the campgrounds. You can send your people to walk the creek. We'll keep a team on the ravine." The state guy nodded, as if this was his idea all along. He looked at me one more time. "If you see sign that says man, not cat, you tell me first." "If I see sign that says man, I'm yelling," I said. He didn't smile. I slept on the floor of Dad's house, on a cheap mat I unrolled in the room that used to be mine. The bed frame was gone, and so were the posters. The gouge in the baseboard where I threw a wrench when I was 14 was still there. Mom's old dresser smelled like cedar whenever you opened a drawer. She used to tuck soap bars wrapped in paper between the shirts. She said it kept moths away and made everything smell like a clean hotel. She liked pretending this house was a hotel where guests didn't stay long. I dreamt I was running switchbacks, and my legs were wrong, my knees bending backward like a deer's. Something watched me from the top of the ridge. I knew it wasn't a cat because I knew what cats feel like when they look at you. This was older. This was interested in the math of me, the number of bones, the distance between breath and next breath. I woke before sunrise. The house was a cool dark that felt like a held breath. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I packed and repacked the same gear as if getting it right would change how the day would go. When I got to the staging area, Liv was at the table. Her hair was tied up. She had a bruise on her knee I hadn't seen yesterday. She looked relieved in the polite way of coworkers who haven't decided if they like each other yet. "We're going back to the slide," she said. "Team from the north is checking deer trails. Cat team's coming from the state. They're bringing a shooter." I nodded. That was what they do. 2 rangers with tranks and 1 with a rifle. They don't say it out loud, but everyone knows. When I was a kid, I wanted that job. The one with the rifle. The one who decides at the last second. That was before I'd seen what bullets do to living quiet. We climbed with less talking. The caution tape and signs at the trailhead looked ridiculous, spread across an open space with nothing but trees behind them. People stepped over the tape with the same reflex as stepping over a garden hose. At the slide, the smell of old blood had gone to pennies and damp iron. The sun hadn't hit it yet. Liv did another slow circle. I stared at where the smear ended. Something buzzed. It was a fly. That should have made me feel something ordinary. It didn't. Down in the ravine, a branch shook. We both turned. The map in my head said there was a game trail there, one that deer used to cross the stream on a log that always looks about to break. We waited, because that is what you do when you hear a branch, and that sound gets into your spine. Then something moved into view. It was a man, barefoot. He wore running shorts and no shirt. His chest was scraped and streaked with dirt. His face looked like it had been sanded down. He stood on the log and stared up at us. His mouth was open. For a stupid second, I thought he was smiling because all I could see were teeth. Then he lifted both hands and I saw why his mouth was open the way it was. All his fingers were gone at the second knuckle. I don't know what I said. Maybe I said his name even though I didn't know it was him. Liv called down, "Ethan?" without moving forward. Her voice was steady, low, exactly the way the manual says and the way your gut remembers from helping get a kid off a ledge. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just stood there with his palms out like a statue. Then his head jerked left, sharp like an animal hearing something, and he stepped backward into the brush and vanished. Not ran, not stumbled, just gone, like he had been on a stage and someone pulled him off with a hook. The branch he'd brushed sprang back. The log wobbled. Liv looked at me. "You saw." "I saw," I said. "Call it in." She did, short and clean. Possible visual on missing juvenile. South Watch Ravine, 100 yards east of Fire Tower Clearing. Subject appears injured, responsive to voice, left seen in ravine brush, requesting med and rope team to lower. The radio barked back. Words, plan, people moving. It all felt too slow and too fast. I scrambled down the safer side to the ravine floor, careful not to set the slope moving. Liv anchored a line and followed. We called. We listened. The ravine did what it does best. It kept secrets. We found blood on a rock near the log, brighter than yesterday's smear. We found a bare footprint in the damp earth. Toes splayed wider than normal, like someone had been grabbing the ground with them. We found a stick with fresh gnaw marks. Teeth marks. Human-sized. Parallel grooves like someone without fingers had tried to hold a thing with their mouth. This is the part where people like you to put in a joke. Something to cut the tension. I don't have one. We kept moving. 10 minutes later, we heard a sound that is hard to put in words. Think about when a dog has something stuck in its throat and tries to clear it. Amplify it. Make it come from a human chest. My body went cold first. Then the training kicked in. We moved toward it. He wasn't far. He had wedged himself in a tangle of downed limbs where the ravine makes a sharp elbow around a boulder. His head was bowed. His back rose and fell like bellows. He was making the sound I can still hear if I close my eyes. Liv approached from one side, me from the other. I had my hands out empty to show him we were hands, not teeth. "Ethan," she said again, soft. "It's Liv from the park. I've got my friend Tom here. We're here to help. Can we help you?" He lifted his head, slow, like it weighed more than it should. His face, I am going to write this straight. No similes. His nose was broken. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with yellow gunk at the corners like an infection. His lips were torn in 2 places. You could see where his teeth had hit the inside of his lip when something slammed his jaw shut. His hair was full of twigs. There were dark streaks on his neck that might have been handprints or might have been mud. He looked at us like we were things on a TV in another room. He opened his mouth. The sound that came out was just air. He tried again. Nothing but that wet rasp. He moved one hand toward us like he meant to show it. That's when I could see the stumps. The cuts weren't smooth. They weren't clean. The bone was there on 2 of them, ragged, and the skin around the ends was chewed in a way that made my stomach lurch. He had tried to say something with his hands, and his hands couldn't do it. "We're going to get you out," Liv said. "Okay? We're going to get you out." He blinked. A slow tear crawled down his cheek like it had a long way to go. He looked down at his feet. I followed his eyes. His right big toe was gone too. I started to move closer. He made a motion so fast I didn't see it start. He snapped his head forward and bit the inside of his arm. Hard. He had to twist to do it. He bit and pulled and made a sound that was not a scream and not a growl. And somewhere between those two things is a sound that makes parts of your body want to run away without you. Blood came. He kept pulling. He was trying to tear his own arm open. We grabbed him. Liv got the wrist with fingers still on it. I got the elbow of the arm he was biting. He thrashed. He was strong, the kind of strong that lives in the spine. He tried to bite my forearm next. I rolled, got my weight on his shoulder. He bucked like a deer hit by a car. I remembered the hospital band on that fisherman and thought about the math again. Bones and breaths. "Ethan," Liv said, not yelling, that same steady tone, a rock in water. "You're safe. You're safe. It's over." That word, over, did something. He stopped. His chest still heaved like something inside him had to be convinced to keep doing it. He looked up at me. I saw him see me for a second. The boy from the picture in the folder was there, blurry but there. He sucked in air. Something moved in his throat. He said one word. "Down." He said it like a noise a bit of metal makes when you drop it on concrete from waist height. He said it, and then his eyes rolled and he went limp. We kept him still as best we could. We wrapped the arm he'd chewed. We called for a basket. The nerve had come back to Liv's hands. She worked fast, methodical. With him out cold, he looked like a kid who'd fallen asleep in a strange place after skiing too hard. The rope team got there with the speed people get when there is something to do that might have a reward at the end. They strapped him in. They hauled. I climbed after, feeling older than the rock. At the rim, a woman with a bag knelt and began to work on his hands and arm and face. She moved with that mix of speed and care that means she's done this work for years and still wants to do it right. "Where'd you find him?" she asked, not taking her eyes off his hand. "Ravine elbow," Liv said. "He bit himself. He's missing fingers, toes." He said one word. "Down." The medic glanced at me. It was not a look that said words would fix this. "He's dehydrated. Shock, infection, adrenaline. I need him somewhere with lights." She looked at the state guy, who joined us at the rim with 4 others in matching jackets. "You get your closures. Now." They radioed the chopper. It came like it always does, late and loud and too big for the trees. They took him. The wind from the rotors threw pine needles and grit at our faces. When the noise fell away, the forest felt like someone had pressed mute. No birds. That means something. Everyone knows that, even if they pretend they don't. We pushed deeper then. There's always a moment after a rescue where you either go home or you go farther. We went farther because of the way Ethan looked at the ground when he said down. The ravine floor is a maze of fallen trees and rocks that want to break your ankle. We moved slow in a line. The state guy was there now with 2 of his crew, one with a rifle. He introduced them like names matter to a place that will swallow them without chewing. They were serious, competent, clean. They asked my opinion like it was still mine to give. We followed the stream. Half a mile down, the ravine tightened. The walls leaned in. There was a place where the water went under rock and stayed under for 20 feet, before coming up in a black pool. When I was a kid, we called it the throat, because if you fell in, you were gone. That's a lie, not a full lie, but a lie said by boys to listen to their echo. The throat, I said, and the state guy nodded like the name was data. We found sign there. At first it looked like more of the scuffs and drips we'd seen before, then it didn't. Someone had dragged something heavy through the gravel and moss. The drag marks were too clean, too straight, like the thing didn't snag on rocks the way you expect. I followed them with my eyes to where they ended in a flat spot under an overhang. Bones, not little, not a single skull to tell a story neat enough for the news. Long bones, stripped, a shoulder blade with a bite mark on the thin edge, a hand-sized chunk of something that was either deer or not deer. The smell hit late because of the breeze. It made the inside of my nose feel burned. Liv's stomach closed over on itself. She swallowed and got her phone out and turned into a camera. The state guy had gloves and the kind of kit you use when you don't know what you're walking into. He moved like he didn't want to startle the pile, as if it might wake up and bark. He pointed at a notch cut into one of the femur-looking bones. It was clean across the cortical surface. I've seen bear gnaw. I've seen cat shear. This wasn't that. Blade, he said. He didn't look at me this time. He knew he didn't need me to say the word. Human? Liv asked. Her voice was small, a precise instrument lifted out of its case. Mixed, the state guy said. Some deer, some not. We need tape. We need... A sound came from the black pool. Not loud, not big. A ripple like something inside the rock let out a slow breath. We all turned as one. The man with the rifle raised it. The sound came again. This time it was the sound of a foot on wet stone. Hold, the state guy said, low. Hold. I stepped to the side to get a better angle. That's what I tell myself. The truth is, I didn't want to be in front of whatever was going to come out of that hole. It didn't come out. Something slid in the darkness. Not human, not cat, not a thing I had a word for. That wasn't a word someone had ruined by writing it on a t-shirt. Liv said my name. It was small and sharp and pulled me back into my body. The state guy motioned and one of his people started to back a step at a time toward the drag mark site to set tape. That's when the smell changed. It went meat sweet. Fresh. We found the couple an hour later, not at the throat, not near the ravine. We found them up on the ridge above, in a place with a view that tourists post for likes. They were not intact. I will not write the details in ways people will misread as flourish. They were both dead. The man had been hit in the back of the head with something heavy. The woman's throat had been opened with something that started sharp and finished dull. Their eyes were gone. That happens. Birds do it. The rings on their fingers were still there. The man's wallet was under a rock 5 feet away, like whoever did this wanted it found and also didn't. There were footprints. Bare. Wide toe spread. Blood. There were also prints that were not human footprints, but were human-made, deep and square, like the heels of a work boot cut off and glued to a plank. I can't make that make sense for you. It didn't make sense to me. It made a pattern, though, and that matters more than sense out there. The state guy stood with his hands on his hips, the way men do when they want to look like they can stop weather. He told us to back out, to give them space, to let his people process. I looked at the woman's face. She had her mouth open like she'd been trying to say something. That's not a metaphor. Her teeth were intact. There was a chip on one of the front ones. I thought about who'd love that chip later if anyone ever got to. We moved back down to the ravine, back to the smell, because work stops for no one's grief. The tape went up. Radios talked. The shooter watched the black hole like a fisherman watches a bobber, patient and hating himself a little for being patient. Around sunset, we heard dogs, not bark happy, work bark. The K9 unit working the lower trail had looped around. The handler brought them into the drag mark site. The dogs went from focused to frantic in one inhalation. They pulled hard toward the black pool. One of them sat down abruptly and whined, low in its throat. The handler tried again. The dog refused, ears flat, eyes on the rock like it could see through. "I'm not forcing him," the handler said. "I force him. He'll puke, and then be no good to anyone." We all knew that feeling. We'd all swallowed that puke at one time or another to keep doing the thing we didn't want to do. The dog said no for us. We pretended it was strategy. Night in the ravine is not night on the trail. It's a pocket of thick. We put up lamps. Their light made a dome about the size of a one-car garage. Outside the dome, the dark felt like something you could grab and choke. We took turns sitting, walking the perimeter, telling stupid soft jokes that died at the tape. At one point, a raccoon waddled into the light like we'd put on a show for it. It looked at us and changed its mind. Smart animal. Around 9, I heard something in the trees above the ravine. Not a branch, not a squirrel. The slow pop of a foot rolling over dry pine cones. I held up a hand. The shooter lifted the rifle and held it loosely. Stupid maybe to hold it loose. He wasn't scared yet. Or he was and didn't want anyone to see it in his forearms. A figure stood at the rim, tall, human-shaped. That is the best I can give you. The lamplight doesn't reach that far. It bleeds out. The figure watched us the way we had watched the hole. Then it did something that made me hate everything inside me that comes from animals. It stepped back out of sight without making sound. I would rather it had run. Running implies gravity and weight and fear. Stepping back like that meant it had learned something about us and had filed it away and would use it later. I told the state guy. He asked why I hadn't yelled. I told him yelling would have made nothing better. He didn't like that answer, but he did like that I hadn't moved toward it. I got credit for that. We held our little light dome until midnight. The sheriff came down the trail with his hat in his hands like it hurt to carry it. He told us the couple's names out loud. He said he'd called their families and told them what they could. He said the chopper took Ethan to the city and then took him somewhere else because they didn't want to keep him where they keep car wrecks and old lungs. He didn't say the word quarantine because people in this town don't like words like that. They like words you can write on handwritten signs and tape to bakery windows when the high school wins games. A storm moved in from the west with no lightning, just the kind of gray that eats stars. The sheriff told us to pull out. The state guy agreed after making a show of thinking about it. We left a camera pointed at the black pool, blinking red in the dark like a bad promise. We packed our lamps. We walked out in a line. The shooter brought up the rear, rifle at half-mast. I had the tape and the map and the pen. It felt like holding a feather instead of a rope. At the trailhead, I stood by the couple's car. The dust on the windshield had 2 palm prints on it now. They were not mine. They were not Liv's. They were low on the glass, like somebody had stood close and leaned. I pointed them out to the state guy. He said we'd dust them in the morning. I thought about the rain and the idiot Hope and said nothing. The next day, the sky hung low and the trees hissed with water. We put on rain shells that made us all look like slick orange insects and went back to work. The state guy brought more people, a tech team that made me feel like a tool and a relic at the same time. They had fiber cameras, ground-penetrating radar, things on tripods that beeped. They put a little drone in the air, and it buzzed around like a curious bee, and then came down with mud on it, because the trees don't care about your gadgets. The camera at the throat had stopped recording around 3 in the morning. It didn't fail. It didn't run out of battery. It was still on. There were no files on it after 3. The state guy looked like someone had kicked his dog. The tech pulled the card and put it in a case like it was a jewel and not a piece of plastic you could buy at a pharmacy. They whispered. I heard none of it because I had put my head into the ravine and was thinking about how to get out of the job of being the person who knew which rocks were slick, because they always are. We went back to the slide where we'd seen Ethan. The rain had washed away a lot and left behind the heavy things. Rocks, bones, a shoe with a torn tongue. We found the shoe wedged behind a root that looked like a hand. I pried it loose and handed it to Liv. She turned it over. There were tooth marks in the rubber. Some were small like a fox. Some were not small. Some weren't round at all. They were flat and square. That's a clue I keep wanting to cut out of this account, because it feels like a joke someone told me as a kid. The kind of thing that's supposed to scare you for 5 minutes and is gone by dinner. But it's what we saw. Square. Flat. Like the thing that bit in was made of boxes. We followed the ravine down again. We should have gotten bored with the routine by then. You don't get bored when the woods are holding out a thing you can't ignore. The drag marks from yesterday were lighter after the rain. New, smaller ones went in an arc toward a bend I don't like. The bend has a fallen tree that looks like a bench and a patch of ferns that never get enough light. It is the kind of place where every kid in town has kissed someone and pretended not to be afraid. I've kissed someone there. She moved away. She lives in a place where the trees are ornamental and watered on Tuesdays. At the bend, there was a sound like someone snapping celery. Then a crow flapped up from the ferns, fat and offended. The ferns moved in a wave, then stilled. We stepped in. The ground was wrong. That's the easiest way to say it. The ground had been dug up and put back. You know that feeling when you sit on a couch someone just got up from? That warmth that isn't yours. The ground felt like that, but with your feet. We dug. We used hands and small folding shovels. We found a layer of leaves that seemed too fresh and then the wet dirt under. Then we found hair. I won't write about that part for long. The hair was braided. It was blonde. It was attached to a scalp. The scalp was attached to a head. The head was attached to a woman who was not the woman we found yesterday. This one was older, with laugh lines. Her eyes were gone too. Her mouth was full of mud. We brought up the rest of her. The state guy came and didn't try to look braver in front of us. We found 3 more, all women, different ages, different hairstyles. Their hands were gone, not at the wrist, at the middle joints, like Ethan's. I'm writing this clean and it reads like a report because that's all that keeps it from spinning into something I can't stand to see. Underneath the clean, it was a pit. It was a larder. Someone had put these women in and taken pieces as they needed. Someone. I keep writing someone to keep myself from writing something. Liv stepped back so fast she slipped and sat in the mud and didn't get up for a long breath. When she stood, she had mud on her palms that looked like gloves. She wiped them on the ferns, slow, like she was afraid to get any part of herself touched by any other part. I wanted to tell her to go home. I wanted to tell her to be a librarian, or the person who calls people to remind them to pay their water bill. I said nothing, because the only job we had was here. We flagged the area, backed out, called it in. The state guy put a perimeter up so fast it looked like he'd been waiting all his life to unspool that tape. He told us to move downstream and continue sweep. He said it in a voice that said he wants to stand between everyone he knows and the thing that made this, and knows he can't, and will try anyway. And that's the first good thing I'd noticed about him. We swept. We found other small things. Bits of cloth, a camping spoon bent double, a strand of dark hair caught in a spider web. We found where something had sat on a flat rock for a long time. How do you know the rock's been sat on? It is warmer. It is smoother. It has a feeling like someone pressed a thought into it and then left before anyone could ask what the thought was. The rain made the day long and the time strange. When we finally stopped because our hands stopped, we were all shaking and no one was cold. We walked out of the ravine single file, quiet, thinking the same thought and not saying it. When a kid says down, where is down? And how far? That night, I sat in Dad's kitchen and stared at the linoleum we never replaced because it was ugly and cheap and easy to clean. I could trace burns from pots Mom set down too hot. I could find where Dad dropped a screw and it made a nick like a black eye. The sheriff called and said words about next steps and media and how the town will feel like it's under a bad cloud now. He didn't ask me to come to the press conference. He isn't dumb. I couldn't sleep. I went out to the truck and sat in the cab while the rain ticked on the roof. I thought about leaving. I thought about what it would mean to put the truck in gear and turn the wheel and pull out of the driveway and get on the highway and not stop until the ridge was a thing I only said by accident when I meant a different thing. I stayed. In the morning, there were too many people at the trailhead, and not enough of them knew what trees do to plans. Reporters. The state had called in more. The sheriff kept his mouth tight and his shoulders down. Someone from the county stood in front of a mic and said, "Tragic," so many times it turned into a sound without meaning. People in town gathered. Some because that's what we do when there's blood, and some because humans are better at being together than being alone when something comes over the fence at night. We got new instructions. The state wanted to grid the ravine. They wanted to put people at every ingress point. They wanted to sweep out in a fan and make sure nothing that should not be alive was still breathing. It sounded good, the way a coach's speech sounds good in a gym where there is a floor and lines. The woods are not a gym. The woods are a mouth. They taste what you bring and decide if they want more. Liv and I got assigned to a lower section past the throat. The map showed a narrow pinch, and then a wide area with boulders like big sleeping animals. The pinch was where the rocks narrowed to shoulders you could touch with both hands. There was a smell there like mushrooms and wet leather. I touched the rock and it felt like touching an old scar on your own skin, familiar and off. We squeezed through, and that was when we heard voices, not talking, murmurs. the sound people make when they are trying not to talk loud and failing. We froze because you always freeze first when you hear human voices where you don't expect them. Liv tapped my arm and pointed. We moved low and slow toward the sound. 3 men stood in a circle near a cluster of boulders. They had hunting vests on and knives on their belts. One had a crossbow slung slack at his hip. They weren't supposed to be there. No one was supposed to be there. They saw us when we were too close for anything but honesty. "Park's closed," Liv said, voice firm. "You need to head out right now." The one with the crossbow smiled the wrong way. "Sure, we'll head out. You going to walk us?" "Yes," she said. "We are." He shrugged. "We haven't shot anything." "Your boots have blood on them," I said, because they did. It might have been deer. It might have been anything. The point wasn't guilt. The point was pressure. He looked down like he only just noticed. "Huh. You're leaving," Liv said, "or I'm calling it in, and you get to explain why you're at a closed scene with weapons and blood on your boots." "What scene?" the guy said. He was the kind of person who learns the edges of rules and spends his afternoons putting his toes on them to see who will look. "This is a ravine. It's been here forever. Can't close rock." Liv reached for her radio. The man without the crossbow stepped forward and put his hand on her forearm. It wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. It was wrong. My hands moved before my head did. I grabbed his wrist and bent it backward. Things popped. He made the noise men make when their plan was never to actually hit someone. "Don't," I said. "We will walk you out, and we won't talk anymore, and you'll get to keep being stupid somewhere else." I let go. The crossbow guy's smile went away. He nodded like he'd been waiting for a reason not to be an asshole, and I'd handed him one. "Okay," he said. "Walk us out." We put them in front and we followed. They muttered to each other. I caught pieces. Should have gone last night. Didn't think they'd cordon. Not like anyone actually. The 3rd man said nothing. He kept looking at the ground like he was trying to memorize it. When we got to the pinch where the rocks touch, he hesitated, and then went through fast, like something behind him had told him to move. As soon as we were past the pinch, everything went noisy. I say noisy because it wasn't one sound. It was all the wrong sounds at once. Something hit the 3rd man from above. It wasn't an animal I know. It was heavy and fast and quiet until the last inch. It hit him at the neck. He didn't even have time to put his hands up. Blood came out in a sheet. He dropped and was trampled by the 1st man as he bolted. The crossbow guy yanked and fired on reflex, and the bolt went into a tree with a thock and hung there vibrating. Liv yelled, "Down!" And I went down because my body remembered that that word in that voice means you might get to keep your eyes. I rolled behind a rock and felt it jar my hip. The 2nd man made the kind of sound you make when your ankle goes under you sideways. He fell and crawled, and then something thick came out of the dark like a cable and wrapped his leg. I grabbed him without thinking and yanked. The cable burned my palm through the glove. It was not a cable. It was rope. Old rope, stiff with rot and something else. I got him free of it. He kicked and sobbed and pissed himself. The crossbow guy looked around like a little boy who just realized the magic trick isn't pretend. "Run," I said to him, and that was maybe a mistake and maybe the only thing that saved him. He ran up the trail and away from the pinch and into the, I don't know, the regular part of fear. Liv had her sidearm out now, pointed at the dark like it owed her money. "What was that?" she said. It was a real question asked by a sober person, not a rhetorical one. I respect that. "I don't know," I said. My hand stung where the rope had burned. It didn't bleed. The man whose neck had been hit wasn't moving. His eyes were open. I have never been so sure in my life that looking away would make him stand up. I kept looking. He did not stand. We backed out, slow, dragging the injured man. The rope snaked again out of the dark and hit a rock with a flat smack. It had knots in it, square knots, ties like the ones my grandfather used when he bundled wood in the shed. It moved like something was pulling it from the far end, and that thing did not get tired. The rope wrapped around a sapling and tightened until the bark split. The sapling creaked. The smell in the air got sweet again. We got past the pinch. The rope stopped at the rock, like whatever pulled it wouldn't go through the narrow. The injured man whimpered and said he was sorry. He said it like he was trying to make it cover more than this spot. The crossbow guy waited for us with eyes that touched the edges of the world and couldn't find a place to sit. We called it in. We said what we could say. Attack. 1 killed in action. 1 injured. Suspect unknown. The woods are alive. We didn't say the last part. We didn't have to. Backup came fast because someone had died, and that shames the woods into letting humans get places. They brought a stretcher and took the living one. The dead man got a tarp. The crossbow guy started explaining himself to anyone who would listen. No one listened. He shut up. We stood there and watched the narrow and waited for it to do something in the day like it had done at night. It didn't. The state guy came and put his hand on the rock and then pulled it back quick like he'd expected it to be hot, and it was. He looked at us. "We're closing this entire ravine," he said. "We should have done that yesterday. That's on me." "No one can close rock," I said, and he gave me a look that said he had not slept. He fortified the pinch like it was a war. He put bodies there. He put cameras. He put trip alarms that hung and made a tinny jingle if a line was tripped. I wanted to tell him the woods are very good at learning the shape of a jingle. I didn't. We moved back up to the place where Ethan had been, because if you can't make sense of one spot, sometimes another spot will give you a corner piece of the puzzle. The blood smear was a paler brown. The stripped bone under the overhang looked like the ghosts of deer walked in circles there. Liv knelt and let the rain hit her face. She looked like the statue of a person who had prayed too long. "Why here?" she said. "Because people step over the tape," I said. She shook her head. "Not that. Why this ravine? There are others. There's the big one near the highway, and the little ones near the lakes with the pretty names. Why this? Because this is the one I know best," I thought. And sometimes a place sees you and decides you belong to it the way you decide a dog is yours, the first time it looks at you like you made a promise. I said, "Because the stone under the stone is soft." She looked at me. I looked away. Sometimes my mouth says things that make me sound like the person I am when I wake up sweating. We walked. We found another cache. Smaller. A pile of hands. Not fresh. Not old. I am not going to paint it for you. The square ends on the fingers matched Ethan's. There was a little bracelet tangled up in it, the kind with beads that spell out a name. The name was Kate. The beads were pink. The elastic had snapped. We bagged it. We did not say the name out loud. The The state guy would say it later into a microphone. Words pull like rope. The rain let up around noon. The clouds lifted and the light changed, and the forest tried to pretend it hadn't been holding on to anything bad. Birds sang. A chipmunk jumped onto a branch and scolded us like we were rude at its party. These are the things that make people say the woods are healing. They aren't. They are just busy. We ate protein bars and pretended to like them. We shared the last of the coffee someone had kept warm in a thermos that had dents on it like an old soldier. The state guy called a meeting at the Pinch and told us the plan. "We're going to send a team down into the hole," he said. He didn't say the throat, because he didn't want to give it a name. "We're going to see what's under the rock. We'll run a line. We'll go slow. We won't be stupid. We'll do it with cameras. We'll do it in daylight. If we see a thing that shouldn't be, we back out and we seal this thing with concrete. We'll bring a truck. We'll pour it. We'll make a dam." I looked at the rock and imagined concrete poured into a mouth. I imagined a thing under there that had learned the shape of rope and knots and men, and I imagined it putting its hands up to stop the flow and laugh. I did not stop him. I didn't have a better idea than plugging a throat. Liv nudged me with her elbow. "You going?" "I said I'd help," I said. That wasn't an answer. She nodded like she heard the truth in what wasn't said, and liked me anyway. They picked the team. The shooter. The tech with the camera on the pole. Me because I knew the rocks. Liv because she'd already been in farther than most. The sheriff because he wouldn't let us go without him, and no one wanted to tell him not to. The state guy wanted to come, and then changed his mind without changing his face. We strapped in. We put on helmets. We checked lines. We did the checklist out loud because saying each piece out loud makes the part of your brain that loves chaos sit down for a minute. We tied off to a tree whose roots have held onto this rock for longer than there have been people here to name it. We stepped into the water. The hole was not a perfect thing. It was irregular and sharp and wet. It didn't look like something a man made with tools over a weekend with a cooler of beer. It looked like the kind of hole that happens when water argues with stone for longer than people have lived in houses. At the edges were scratches, deep, lines like claws, and also like chisels. My palm burned again where the rope had licked me, and I realized there was grit embedded in the skin. The rope had been dragged in and out of this hole so many times that it had ground bits of rock into itself, and then into me. We went in one by one. The camera went first, on the pole. The tech held the screen and watched like it was a movie he had spent all his money to make. The shooter went next, rifle up. He couldn't use it in there. The line wouldn't let him raise it without jamming. He knew that and went anyway. Liv went after him. I went after Liv. The sheriff came last. The rope on my harness sounded like breathing, like a thing with lungs that wanted to sync with mine. Inside, the air felt old. That sounds like I'm making things up. It smelled like the inside of a ship left in a harbor too long. Wet wood, mold, iron. There was sound too, a drip that came regular as footsteps, and then a soft rasp like sand sliding over sand. The camera light made a cone in front of us. Things shone in it that I didn't want to remember. Smooth patches on rock where hands might have been. Scuffs in a pattern like something with knees had moved here often. And in one spot, what looked like a drawing scratched into the wall. I got close to look. It wasn't a drawing. It was tally marks. We moved forward until the roof lowered and we had to crawl. The camera showed the tunnel bending slightly left. The tech muttered to himself, 4 meters, 5, keep it steady. He had forgotten he was saying it into a radio that made all of us listen to the count like we were in time with him. The tunnel opened into a chamber. You could stand there. You could even stretch if you didn't mind your shoulders touching damp rock. In the middle of the chamber was a pile of rope. Not new rope. Old. Sailor rope. Thick and stiff and frayed at the ends where there had been a splice. My brain did the kind of math it shouldn't. There is no water big enough to hold a boat up here. There are no sails. There is rope. Who brings rope down here? Liv whispered. People who like to pull, I said, and hoped my voice didn't sound like it did in my head. The camera turned. The light hit something white. Bones. Small ones. Rat. Bird. Teeth. A child's tooth, tiny and clean in a little bowl someone had made in the stone by grinding. A hair comb, plastic, the cheap kind you buy at a gas station. A metal buckle. The strap was gone. The shooter shifted his weight, and the rifle tapped the rock and made a sound like a mistake. The sound went down the tunnel like it had been waiting for a reason to leave us. The rope pile moved. We all saw it. I know we all saw it because later, when we argued about what we saw, we used the same words. Wriggle, uncoil, breathe. It moved like the rope was a thing alive, and all of it was one animal waiting for the quiet between our breaths. The shooter raised the rifle. The tech swore softly. The sheriff said my name like I could go back and not go forward at the same time. Liv put her hand on my back, between the shoulder blades, and I felt the heat of her palm through the jacket and the skin and the history. From under the rope pile came a hand. Skin. Human. Not cut at the fingers. The nails were broken. The palm had lines like a map. The wrist had a bracelet on it, a woven one like kids make at camp. I thought of Kate, and then saw that this bracelet had black and gray, not pink. The hand opened. The hand closed. It was too pale to belong to a live person. It was the way flesh looks when it's been in water too long. It clutched at the air and at nothing. Hello, Liv said, because she is the kind of person who offers her voice first. We're here. We're here. Can you hear me? Can you? She didn't finish because the rope tightened around the wrist like a snake and yanked. The hand disappeared. The pile stopped moving. The chamber went quiet except for the drip. The shooter used a word that made no sense in that space. He said sorry to the rock. He said sorry to no one. He looked at the sheriff, the way men look for permission to do what they wanted to do when they were 12. The sheriff shook his head once. The shooter lowered the rifle the way a person lowers their eyes at a grave. We go back, the sheriff said. We seal it. Something laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a cackle. It sounded like a person breathed out through their nose after someone tells a joke that isn't funny, and they are trying to be polite. It came from behind us. We turned as one. The tunnel we'd come through wasn't the tunnel anymore. The walls had shifted. I know rock doesn't do that. It had. The passage was narrower. The light from the camera bounced back at us like it hit something wet. There was a smell of skin that has not been washed. There was a shape. There were eyes. I'm not writing them down. I will not give you that. If I put them here, I will have to see them again. They were big, and they were not where they should have been, and there were more than two. That is enough. The shooter fired. The sound in that small space was a punch, the rock spit sparking dust. The shape moved, not fast, quietly. The rope on my harness went taut. Someone pulled from outside and the whole line sang like a guitar string. The sheriff grabbed my jacket and pushed and said, "Out." We backed toward the hole. Something brushed my ear. It felt like breath. I stumbled. Liv hauled me upright. The camera went dark. The tech made a noise of pure pain, the sound of money dying. "Not now," I wanted to tell him. "Later you can mourn your toy. Not now." We reached the narrow. The shooter went through first, then the tech without the camera, then Liv. I went last with the sheriff behind me, because he refuses to let anyone be the last one in a thing. The rope around my waist pulled and I moved because that's what you do when something wants you out, and it is a good something for once. Something grabbed my ankle. Not rope, not hand. I kicked. It let go. I went forward and felt my vest snag and then rip, and then I was squeezed through like food through a throat. The sheriff came behind, and for a second there was no sheriff, and then he was there, on top of me, heavy and breathing and swearing. We came out into the stronger light. The forest looked like the biggest cathedral I had ever seen. That is a dumb thing to write, and I am leaving it because it is true. Outside, people were shouting. The state guy was there, wide-eyed. He looked at us like we had been to the moon and had brought a moon disease back. The shooter stared at his hands like he didn't recognize them. Liv laughed once, short and high, like a person coming up from water when they thought they were going to drown. "Seal it," the sheriff said. No one argued. They brought concrete. They brought a truck that had to back down a trail that hated it. They braced the rock with beams that looked ridiculous against geology. They mixed and poured and grunted like men in old posters. The concrete flowed gray and thick and went into the hole like it belonged there, and always had. The tech put another camera up, and then another. The shooter took a position with the rifle and did not blink. The state guy watched the level rise like a man watches rain in a drought. We all waited for something to push back up through the wet and grin. Nothing did. It took hours. The rain came again. The concrete steamed a little, and that made everyone nervous. When it was done, when the hole was a single flat gray scar that would never look like stone, the sheriff sat down on a rock and put his head in his hands, and that was the first time I ever saw him look like a person whose arms were too short for the thing he had to carry. We cleared out in stages. The perimeter stayed. The cameras stayed. The tape fluttered and looked like a gift someone forgot to wrap. That night, in the dark of my father's house, I thought I heard rope moving in the hall. I got up and walked it end to end. The only things in the hall were themselves. I opened the closet, and the old coats looked down on me like people in photographs who are bored with you. I went back to the mat on the floor and didn't sleep. My ankle throbbed where something had grabbed it. I didn't turn on the light to look. I didn't want to see if there were square bruises there. In the morning, I went to the hospital in the city to see Ethan, because I am the kind of person who goes to see the thing that will make him feel worse. They put him in a unit where visitors go through doors that whoosh, and you see yourself in glass a lot. The nurse at the desk had kind eyes and a mouth that had learned to keep from frowning at strangers. She told me I could have 10 minutes. She told me he hadn't said anything else. She told me he slept with his hands under his pillow like he was trying to warm them. He looked smaller in the bed. I know that's what people write, and it's still true. His fingers were wrapped. His arm looked like a thing someone had fixed and put back on. His face had less dirt and more color. His eyes were closed. I stood there with my hands on the rail and said, "Hey, kid," because I didn't know what else to say. His eyes opened like it hurt to do it. He looked at me. He remembered. I saw it. He moved his lips. I leaned in. "Down," he whispered, same as before, but softer. A prayer now instead of an alarm. "We sealed it," I said. "It's closed." He shook his head. It was a tiny movement, like a heartbeat you could see. He mouthed a word. I couldn't catch it. I said, "Say it again." He tried, and the word was a shape that would not form on his mouth because the rest of his face had decided words were a bad idea. He closed his eyes. He let out a long breath. I left because the nurse came and because the room felt like a place where people tried not to make the same mistake twice, and always did. On my way out, a man in a suit with a badge that wasn't the sheriff's badge asked me questions I didn't want to answer. I answered them because not answering would make more questions. He asked me if I believed in organized human trafficking rings. I said I believed in rope. He didn't write that down. Back at the ridge, the concrete had set into a dull gray patch that made the ravine look like it had a tooth. The cameras were on. The tech was proud. The state guy had circles under his eyes and a cup of coffee he kept drinking even though it was cold. The shooter had a different rifle now. I didn't ask why. Liv was there with a bandage on her ankle where a rock had kissed her. She nodded at me like we were two people at the laundromat who recognized each other's socks. We stood there together and listened to the birds. There were more of them than yesterday. A whole lot more. They sang too loud, like a party after a storm that knocked the power out, and everyone is pretending the lights are back. I looked at the concrete. There was a hair caught in it. It was long and dark and made a curve like a question mark. I bent to pull it and stopped my hand an inch above it because I didn't want to touch it. Liv saw me stop. She didn't say anything. The state guy said the words people say when something has worked. Contained, mitigated, ongoing. He told us not to talk to the press. He told us the town would heal if we let it. He told us they were coordinating with federal folks now, and that made some people clench their teeth and some relax. He told us we did good. He looked at me when he said that. I felt nothing. Before we left, we walked the ridge one more time. Slow. Like people in a house they're about to sell. We looked at the switchbacks and the carved initials on the handrail at the overlook, and the places where boots had dug little holes, and the rocks where people sit to tie laces and think they are alone. We picked up a wrapper someone had dropped. We folded tape back into the bag. We pretended the world had edges again. At the trailhead, a woman put flowers on the sign. She was shaking. I wanted to hold her and tell her that flowers are nice and also useless. I kept my hands to myself. The sheriff talked to the press without saying the bad parts. He looked older. He will be older now. I went home. I washed my hands until my skin hurt. I ate food I couldn't taste. I slept and woke and slept again. The house breathed. The sound of rope moving in the hall came again. It could have been the wind through the eaves. It could have been the house settling. It could have been my brain making sure I didn't have a good night. It could have been all that. It could have been something else. I got up. I put on my boots. I took my bag. I didn't call anyone because if you say the plan out loud, it stops being a plan and starts being the thing that people can argue with. I went back to the ridge. I went back to the ravine. The concrete was there. The cameras were there. The tech wasn't. The shooter wasn't. The state guy had taken a meeting and left a kid with a clipboard who tried to stop me and didn't. Liv wasn't on duty. The sheriff was at a town hall where people demanded prevent and apologize in the same sentence. It was me and the concrete and the birds. I stood on the gray patch. I felt nothing through my boots. That was a lie I told myself. I felt something like a deep purr. Maybe it was my own blood. Maybe it was the stream under rock. Maybe it was the thing that had learned to laugh. I took a deep breath. I let it out. I bent and put my ear to the concrete. There was a sound. You know it if you've heard it. It is the sound of someone tying a knot when they don't want anyone to know they're tying it. I lifted my head. I wanted to throw up. I didn't. I stood up slow. I walked back up to the trailhead and down to my truck. I sat behind the wheel. I looked at my hands. There were square bruises on my ankle now. Faint, but there. I wanted to take a picture. I didn't. I wanted to drive to the sheriff and say the sound out loud. I didn't. I drove to Dad's. I sat at the table and wrote this down. I am writing it clean, because the other way makes me feel like I'm giving it what it wants. I am writing it because if you don't put the thing in words, it lives in the parts of you that don't speak, and it gets big there, and you start to talk with its voice. We sealed the hole. We counted bodies. We took a boy out and put him in a bed, and his hands will never hold a basketball right again. We did what humans do. We put tape on the forest and posted on the internet and went home and locked doors that only keep out polite things. When I put my ear to the concrete, the sound of tying stopped. It stopped because it knew I was listening, or it stopped because it had finished. When I went back to the trail this afternoon, the couple's car was gone. The flowers were soggy. The tape had a tear in it, like someone had run a finger down its length. A whistle lay in the dust in front of the sign. I picked it up and it was warm. I wish that were the end of the story. It isn't. The ridge is quiet right now. Quiet is a trick. Quiet is a waiting room. I am going to go talk to the sheriff. I am going to tell him the sound I heard without trying to make it funny. I am going to ask him for the keys to the county lot, because there are old things in there. Rope. Hooks. Things made of iron no one uses anymore. I am going to get ready to go back down, even if going down is the last smart thing I do. The woods took people. We found some of them. Not enough. It isn't done because we said it was done. It will be done when whatever we sealed has no more ways to pull. I am going to the ridge again at first light. Or before. I know a way into the ravine that isn't on the map. My father showed me when I was 12 and wanted a place to smoke. And he wanted me to have a place where I could see the house if I stood on my toes. I'll take a coil of new rope, and I'll take a coil of old rope, and I'll see which one the dark prefers. If you read this before I'm back, don't follow. The ridge wants you to. It wants the shape of your walk, and the sound of your breath. It wants your hands. If you read this after, I hope the concrete is still a flat gray tooth. I hope the birds keep singing too loud. I hope the whistle in my pocket is still warm because my hands made it that way, and not because something else did. I hope, that's all. I left the house before light. No coffee. Nothing in my stomach. I took the old iron hooks from the county lot like I said I would. They were heavy as sin, black with age, edges honed by use. I looped them to my belt, packed a coil of new rope and a coil of old rope from Dad's shed. The old kind, tarred and rough. The kind sailors used when there were sails here in stories, if not water. I left a note on the counter that said where I was going, and I hated myself for writing it because notes like that get found. The way in my father showed me wasn't on the map. It was a narrow slot under a fallen trunk south of the ravine mouth, a place deer used when they needed a quick cut to the creek. It felt like a lie even as it opened under my boots. "This isn't a secret," it said. "It's a doorway someone forgot to brick up." I stepped through and the hill held me on both sides. Water sang somewhere, and something else made a dry noise at a steady pace. Not walking, not wings. The sound a knot makes when it's worked tight against itself. I climbed down into a dim that wasn't night and wasn't day. The stream tugged at my ankles. A cool breath came up out of the stone like a body exhaling under thin blankets. I didn't turn on the headlamp. I let my eyes stretch and make what they could of the gray. The concrete we poured wasn't far by map, but underground distance changes shape. I moved along and took turns as the ground told me to. There were marks in the silt like something had been dragged and didn't care if it left a map. There were bare footprints that made my stomach flutter. The toes splayed like hands. Sometimes you see that when people are hurt. Sometimes you see it when people learn a way to move and stop remembering how to do it the old way. At a bend, there was a low place where water ran flat as glass. The surface was scratched. That's not right. Surface doesn't scratch. Below the water, gouges in the rock crisscrossed like someone had been combing it with a rake. On the bank lay a square-toothed length of wood, the kind shipwrights used in photos that hang in diners. I picked it up. It was new wood, fresh cut, edges burnt like someone had heated it. It smelled like tar. Ahead, the tunnel rose. I climbed a slope of old gravel that crunched loud enough to make my spine tense. Up top, the air got warmer. The knot-tying sound got close. It was regular, like breath, like tide. I put my hand on the wall and felt a tiny thump there, steady. Not heart, not water. Like a machine left on long after the factory closed. The chamber opened with no warning. One step I was in tunnel. Next step I was in a room tall enough that my headlamp could not find the top. I turned it on because I had to. The beam cut a slice through the dark and showed me a wheel. It sat at the far side of the room, set into the rock like the rock had grown around it. It was a capstan, the kind they use to pull rope on ships. Thick, vertical, with bars through it for hands to push. It was built out of wood and iron, and things that had been wood once. The bars were smooth from touch. A rope as thick as my forearm wound around it 3 times and disappeared into a slit in the wall like a tongue pulled into a mouth. The rope was old and new, spliced a dozen times, bristling with hair and fibers that weren't rope. The wheel turned 1 notch, and then paused and then turned 1 notch again. Click. Breathe. click. On the near side of the room, against the wall, a neat row of shoes, hiking boots, sneakers, a pair of cheap flats with a bow, all with dirt still on them, lined like someone had been kind. Beside them, a pile of rings and a nest of twine. I knew what that pile was before I touched it. I didn't touch it. The rope shifted in its groove. The capstan creaked. An old hook clanked against the iron frame. Sound carried out down a side tunnel I hadn't seen until I moved. From there came a soft noise. Not the tying, not the creak. The sound people make when they try not to be heard and fail. A hum, almost. "Hello," I said, voice small, too ordinary for the room. My voice sounded like litter. There was a reply, not words. The hum quickened. I followed the sound down the side run. It bent hard and ended in a grate. Not metal. Woven wood, green when it was cut and now black. It had been oiled, tarred, mended. Behind it, a space big enough for a person. In that space, a person. Her hair was matted to her skull. Her eyes flicked away from my light and found my shadow like she trusted the part of me that was dark more than the part that glared. Her hands were stumps wrapped in cloth. One foot had 3 toes. The other had none I could see. She had a face like any person at the grocery store. Tired. The hum was in her throat. I squatted. "I can get you out." She shook her head once. Her eyes slid past me to the capstan room. She swallowed and the hum stopped and she forced sound out. "2, she said. "2 what?" "2 rooms," she said, and the words hurt her mouth. "2 door. One you came, one lower. It feeds up. You sealed the little one, not the river mouth. There are more. There are more." The capstan clicked. She flinched, the kind of flinch you do when the train time is burned into you. I looked at the woven grate. It had knots that weren't pretty. Square. Fast. I took my knife and worked one. The blade stuck. Tar held like a second hand. The knot opened the way a wound opens. I cut another fast. I got half the grate loose and leaned it aside. I held out my hand. She looked at my fingers like they were bait. "Please," I said. Not a speech. Just the one word you don't get back. She put what was left of her hand in mine. She weighed nothing. Dried out. A person pressed thin by long pressure. I eased her into the room and then the rope in the wall jerked like a fish felt me on its line. I turned and saw the capstan move a little faster. Someone was pushing. You could hear the bars clack. I pulled her with me toward the way I came. We stepped around the rings and the shoes and the capstan that turned. Something in the slit tossed like rope in surf. For a second I saw the shape of something under the rope. Not animal, not machine. A mass. A knot made of knots. It moved like muscle under skin. It had no face. It didn't need one. We made the tunnel. Behind us I heard feet on stone. Not shy, not rushing. Steady. There was a man in the capstan room now. I couldn't see him yet. I could tell by the sound. The bars knock when a person pushes who knows the bar. I know how a man sounds. We made the bend and the grate was behind us, and then the tunnel narrowed until I had to go sideways. The woman made a sound like a tire giving up. I got her through the pinch and set her in a little pocket where rock made a seat. I put her hand on the pack of water and tore the cap with my teeth and tipped it to her mouth, and she drank like a dog, fast and without manners. Something scraped behind us. I turned on the headlamp again, and light fell on a face. I knew him. Not from town, from yesterday. The man with the crossbow. He had left the pinch with us and run. Now he stood with rope across his chest and a different smile. He wasn't alone. 2 more men with him, their faces the faces of boys at a bad camp, excited and terrified at the same time. They had tar on their hands. Their nails were black. One's teeth were black. They were wet. They smelled like the capstan room and the river. They didn't look surprised to see me. "You shouldn't be here," the crossbow man said. He had no crossbow. "You shouldn't either," I said. "It was quiet a long time," he said, like he was explaining weather. "Then it got hungry. It started taking what wandered to it. Then it started asking. Rope was old. Someone had to keep it. We keep it. It keeps away worse." "What's worse?" I asked. He shrugged. "A forest that belongs to no one. People walking in thinking it's theirs. People building things and cutting things and leaving the stone dry. You know that worse. You left. You came back. We all come back." He stepped forward. I lifted the hook without thinking. It felt right in my hand. The iron weight changed the angle of my wrist the way the right bat changes a swing. The other men spread to the sides a little. They were practiced. They had done this dance in tunnels where light makes liars. The capstan clicked. The crossbow man's head turned to hear it. That sound ruled him like a metronome rules a song. I moved then. I didn't do anything pretty. I swung the hook in a short circle and connected with his shoulder. It dislocated with a wet crack. He made a sound like the start of a laugh, and then it turned into a bark of pain. He grabbed the iron on the next pass with his tarred hand, and the hook bit his palm. He held anyway. I chopped again, and the second man stepped in. Fast, a block, an elbow. He was trained, not by any school I know, by repetition. Down here the teacher is a wheel. The woman behind me made that tire sound again. She tried to stand and couldn't. She hit my calf once with what was left of her hand, and that gave me a stupid bolt of strength. I dropped the hook and went low and took the second man's leg, and he went down the way men always go down when gravity picks them up and sets them aside. His head hit stone. Stone won. The crossbow man came in, breath hot with tar and rain. He went for my throat with his black nails, and I thought of the capstan bars and turned, and his hand scraped my jaw and took some skin, and I smelled my own blood, and it made me angry. Not brave, just mean. I took the old rope off my shoulder and whipped it into his face. He raised his arms, and the rope wrapped his hands. I yanked. Square knots I had tied without thinking grabbed themselves and held. He swore. It was a relevant word, the kind you use when you realize you aren't the strongest thing in the room. A voice came from the dark behind them. Tom. Calm. Tired. The sheriff. He stepped into the gray with Liv at his side and the shooter a little behind, rifle ready and no way to use it in that narrow place. "Pick a side," the sheriff said to the men. "You don't have long." The crossbow man sneered and looked past us toward the capstan room like it could hear us and could be angry. "You won't kill it," he said. "You can pour all the rock you want. It took the river first. It takes the woods from the bottom up." He yanked the rope hard, came off his feet, hit me, and we both went down. In the scramble, I felt the old rope move in my hands like it wanted to be in a knot. That should be nothing. Rope moves. It has torque. This moved like it knew where to put itself. Liv stepped around us and used her boot hard on the third man's knee. It popped. He went brave for a second and then sane. He crawled away and then crawled toward the capstan room like that was where a parent would be. The sheriff didn't shoot. He put his hand on my collar and dragged me up, and I got my feet under me and drove the crossbow man into the wall. His head hit. He went soft. I tied him without thinking. 2 turns and a hitch. The rope grabbed him the way the tunnel wanted. "Get her out," the sheriff said, chin toward the woman. "You and Liv." "I'll..." The capstan in the big room turned fast. Not click, not breathe. It spun. The rope howled through the slit. Stones shook dust. Water jumped and made a pattern like hands. From the doorway of that room came the shape of something that wasn't a shape. Rope. Hair. Burlap. Bone. A bundle of parts bound together by purpose. It rolled in a way rolling shouldn't happen. Things peeked out from it that weren't supposed to be in rope. An eye. A tooth. A finger chewed to square. The shooter fired and the bullet chewed old rope and the bundle faltered and then remade itself and kept coming. Liv grabbed the woman and hauled, and I said I'd help, and then the sheriff pushed me. "I said out," he said. "You don't need to see this part." "I'm not leaving you," I said. "You are," he said, and smiled like a person who knows where everyone is going to sit when the music stops and doesn't like the seating and can't change it. He stepped toward the oncoming mass and lifted his old iron hook the way fishermen lift gaffs when big fish come in. He put the hook into the bundle. It bit. It bit hard. He pulled. The wheel screamed in the other room as rope jammed against rope. The bundle came apart in one place, and a dozen small things poured out. Hands, teeth, a braid, a child's shoelace. They skittered like crabs. The shooter fired again, and then the tunnel filled with smoke and motion and shouting and the smell of tar burning. I grabbed the woman with Liv and we went the way I had come. Blind, fast, both of us half carrying, half dragging. Behind us, the capstan sound changed. It slipped and caught, slipped and caught. Rope shrieked as it burned across iron. Something let out air the way a body lets out air when a person finally stops holding it in. The tunnel shook. Not like an earthquake. Like a thing under us was rolling over. Water slapped the stone, then surged around our calves. We made the slot under the fallen trunk and shoved the woman through, and then ourselves and the stream hit us from behind like someone angry. We made the bank and slid down it and sprawled in the brown ferns, and all I could smell was tar and old dirt coming up to meet air it had not seen in a century. The ravine groaned, a dull sound, a big animal rolling. The fallen trunk shifted. The slot we'd used slumped, edges caving in like a mouth trying to close on a bite. A breath of fetid air rushed out and made my eyes tear. In it was heat. In it was the sound of rope being cut. I stood and counted the people in front of me. Me, Liv, the woman, the shooter, crawling out of the slot 2 body lengths behind us, face black with smoke, coughing something that sounded like apology. No sheriff. I dropped to my knees and went back into the hole, and the shooter grabbed my collar and hauled me back and then punched my chest like that would stun the idiocy out of me. "You go in there. You don't come out," he said. He had blood on his lip. He knows. He isn't dumb. The slot settled with a hiss. Stone kissed stone and held. The capstan noise stopped. The ravine made a little sigh that could have been water finding a new way home. Then quiet. Not the trick quiet, not the party. Real quiet, birdless, honest. We got the woman to the trailhead the way you get a person out of a burning building. Fast and not gentle. The med crew took her. Her eyes stayed on the trees the whole time, like she expected a knot to appear there and ask for her back. When they loaded her, she grabbed my sleeve with what was left of her hand and tugged until I leaned close. "Not sealed," she said. "There are mouths you don't see. They look like river. They sound like trees. They take the old words from the men who cut and never said sorry." I nodded like I had a plan for river mouths. I had nothing. The state guy came running, lips white, shirt untucked. He asked where the sheriff was. We looked at the closed slot. He understood. He put his hands on his head and walked away 5 steps, and then came back, because walking away didn't change anything. He told people to dig. The shooter told him to stop. He stopped. He made a call and said a full name into the phone, and it sounded like a door closing. Liv sat in the dirt and stared at her wet boots. Her hands shook. She still had her gun. She put it down like it was hot. The shooter squatted and put his head between his knees and breathed like he'd run a long way with a heavy pack, and then straightened and said he needed a minute, and then didn't take it. I went back down the hill alone while they built a new plan. I told no one. I stood on the concrete tooth. It was warm, not hot like a stove, warm like an old dog. I put my ear to it and heard nothing. That was worse. Up on the ridge, the town had gathered again. Word had torn through it the way crows go up when a hawk slides over the field. People wanted to help and asked how, and hated the only answer. They held hands. They posted. Someone hung signs at the church with the sheriff's name in block letters. The couple's faces were on a board by the coffee place with a ribbon. The flowers on the trailhead sign had multiplied like mushrooms. We dug where we could. We found old tunnels no one mapped, culverts from the WPA days, drains from mills that hadn't turned in 50 years. We found one hole with a brick throat and a stack of stones beside it like someone had been making a wall and ran out of light. In that one we found bones that weren't deer. In another we found rope burned at one end and fresh at the other. We poured concrete. We blocked. We braced. We set cameras and the cameras blinked and sometimes were blind. And we had no reason for that blind beyond the old one. The woods wanted. Night fell, and I stayed on the ridge. Liv too. The shooter sat with us for a while, and then went to talk to the state guy and didn't come back. The woman they took to the hospital made it through the day. They said her name on the radio, and people in town said, "I know her sister, and she worked the late shift at the grocery, and she used to run, remember?" They said those things because saying them makes a person less like part of a pile. At midnight, the birds shut up at the same instant like a conductor dropped a hand. The stream in the ravine hissed, then stilled. In the gap, something tapped on the concrete. Not loud, not ritual. A simple knock that said, "I am still here." The camera lights flickered. The state guy swore so soft I barely heard it. The shooter raised his rifle. Liv touched my arm. Her hand was cold through the jacket. The knocking stopped. A minute later, in the thick of the trees behind us, rope slid through branches. Not near, not far. The sound carries in woods. It can lie. I turned slowly. The headlamp lifted and showed a low line tied between 2 trunks. On it, in a row, knots. 10 of them. Simple square knots. First taught to children for ties that hold. Someone had set them at eye level and pulled them tight. In the middle of the line hung a whistle. the same cheap kind from the trailhead box, yellow plastic bitten at the mouth. I stepped toward it and the whole line jerked, once, like it lived and had a heart. Liv said my name. I stopped. I thought about cutting it. I thought about grabbing it and letting whatever was on the other end pull me so I could see its face. I thought about the sheriff under a coil of old rope, iron hook in his hand, pulling against a thing that pulls. I thought about Ethan saying one word and meaning more than we let him say. I didn't touch the line. I took the whistle. It was warm. The rope twitched, not angry, interested. It went slack and slid away into the dark, and I didn't see where it went. The state guy said we needed to fall back to the trailhead. We did. In the lot, under the floodlight, the yellow whistle looked like a toy. I put it on the table where maps lie, and it rolled and stopped with the mouth facing me. I didn't blow it. I don't think anyone should ever blow that whistle again. At dawn, they found the sheriff. Not his body, his hat. It lay in the creek 2 miles down, caught in a branch. The band had a knot tied in it that hadn't been there before. Square. Simple. He'd hate that detail. He wouldn't want to be a piece of someone else's story like that. We held a meeting in the school gym because there was nowhere else big enough. The state guy spoke plain. No myths. No polishing. He said words like hazard and closure and recovery. He said there would be more concrete. He said there would be more patrols, and that the ridge was closed from north to south until the ground stopped giving up old holes. He said all this, and no one threw anything, and no one clapped. They just stood and listened and went home because there is no replacement for your home. I slept at my father's house for an hour and woke to the smell of tar in the hall. I followed it. The front door had a new rope tied to the handle, a small loop with an ugly knot. It was tight, but not tied to anything on the other side. It was a knot for a knot's sake. I cut it with the kitchen knife and threw it in the sink and turned the water on until the rope lay drowned and heavy. The water smelled like river. I went to see Ethan again. He was awake. He watched the TV with the sound off and didn't watch it. His mother sat with him and looked like anyone who ever sat next to a bed. She thanked me for something I didn't do and smiled, and her mouth shook. She left for coffee. I sat. He looked at me and took a breath and shaped a new word. Under, he said. Then he swallowed and said, more. I nodded. I know. He raised his wrapped hand like he meant to point and couldn't. He looked at the floor, then at the window, then at the lower corner of the room where the baseboard has a seam. Hollow, he said. The word cost him. Town is hollow. On the way out, a man in a suit with a federal badge asked me to walk him through the tunnels on a map again. I told him I could walk them better than I could draw them. He asked me why people disappeared more now. I told him they didn't. We'd just started counting. He didn't like that answer. He wrote it down anyway. We worked for days. We filled holes until we ran out of mix and then found more mix and kept pouring. We burned rope when we found it and it screamed like wet pine. We dug up larders and called families and said the words and stood in fields while people cried and did not know us and didn't need to. We found 3 women alive in small rooms behind woven grates. They had hands that were not hands anymore. They had eyes that liked shadow. They had names. The town learned them fast and hung them around the gym like lanterns. Saying names isn't enough. It is what we do. Liv kept going even when her ankle swelled under her sock. The shooter stopped talking and didn't start again. The state guy got old in a week. Volunteers came and some of them looked surprised that the woods could be mean, and then stopped looking surprised because the woods do not need your opinion. We never found the capstan again. We looked. Tunnels collapsed and opened somewhere else. The wheel either burned or walked or both. We pulled up a line near the creek and found, on the far end, a knot made like a human hand. 5 short square ends that closed when we pulled one cord and opened when we pushed. It was made of hair and wire and vine. The tech wouldn't bag it. He said no, and his mouth trembled like a child. I bagged it. A week later, the concrete teeth were a part of the ravine the way scars are part of skin. Birds sang again and meant it. Hikers came to the North Trail and read the signs and took selfies with the caution tape in the background like a trophy. The town held a vigil, and people cried when the sheriff's hat sat on the table with his name beside it. They put a rope on that table too, a coil of new, clean line tied with pretty knots for rainbows and trucks and bosun chairs. A kid in a scout uniform stood straight beside it and learned what it means to have a skill that can be used to pull, and how that can be both a good and a ruin. I made myself go sit by the concrete tooth one more time. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The stream ticked. The air smelled like pine and damp stone. I put my ear down. Nothing. I sat up. I let my breath slow. In the quiet, on the edge of hearing, something far under the concrete slid over something else. It was small. Not a capstan. Not a body. A knot being tied somewhere in a dark place where people used to keep potatoes and now keep other things. I stood and looked toward town. The mill pond was calm and green and made a flat mirror for a sky that was trying to be clear. Across the water, I could see the old culvert mouth where kids jump when summer dares them. The ring of black around it might have been mold. It might have been tar. It looked like a mouth where a tooth used to be. Liv walked up beside me and didn't talk. We stood together long enough that standing felt like a job we were good at. She nudged me finally, eyes on the culvert. "How many?" she asked. "More than we know," I said. "You going back in? If I can do it without feeding it." She nodded. "Bring old rope," she said. "The new stuff slides." We went back to town. People waved and said thank you. People cried and didn't. The wind pushed smell from the bakery across the square, sweet rolls and coffee and butter. Someone had hung small coils of rope from the lampposts with little cards that said things like, "Be safe," and "We're strong," and "For the sheriff." The knots were neat and cute. They made my teeth hurt. At home, the house was quiet. I cleaned the hooks and oiled them and wrapped them in rags. I put them on the shelf that still holds my mother's soap bars. I pulled my sock off and looked at my ankle. The square bruises had gone yellow at the edges. They looked like a thing learning to fade. I pressed my thumb in the middle of one. It hurt. That felt honest. I sat at the table and wrote. I wrote what we did and what we found and what we failed to do. I wrote the sheriff's name and the couple's names and the first names of the women we pulled from the rooms, because those belonged to them. I wrote Ethan's one word, down, and his second word, under, and the word he couldn't say yet, that meant all the places we haven't blocked and all the people we haven't counted. I wrote that when I put my ear to the concrete and heard the small slide. It felt less like a threat and more like a thing making plans. I slept. I dreamed about rope that ties itself into little hearts and then tightens. I woke to a quiet house. I made coffee and it tasted like coffee. I drove to the ridge and stood on rock, and trees looked like trees, and the stream sounded like a stream. A hawk lifted on a line of air and watched something I couldn't see, and then let it be. There are still people missing. There always will be as long as there are woods and water and holes and men who like to keep wheels turning. There are still mouths under town, some old and lined, some fresh. We will find them. We will fill them. We will miss some. The work keeps going because the ridge is a mouth, and a mouth is never all the way closed. This is the last part of what I can tell, not the end. It's just where I choose to stop. The rest is work. Walking lines, listening to stone, pulling people out of rooms, and telling them they are here, and that matters, even if their hands are not all there anymore. The rest is rope, the good kind, the kind that holds when you hold it back, and not the kind that makes little knots in the night and waits. If you hike South Watch when the signs come down, if they ever do, don't go alone. Don't step off the trail because you think you know a better way. Don't pick up rope you find hanging in trees, no matter how neat the knots are, no matter what words dangle from them. If you hear a sound like someone tying a knot and you don't see anyone, walk away. If you see a whistle, leave it for the wind. If you put your ear to the ground and hear nothing, be glad. If you hear something, for God's sake, tell someone. And if it calls you down, say, no, I will be on the ridge. I will listen. I will count. I will pull. I will try not to feed it. And I will keep my hands open, even when the woods want them.